Welcome back to Teacher U's Mac Excel tutorial part 2. In this video, we're going to be looking at two main objectives. The first, teachers will be able to create filters and use them to view initial summaries of groups of data. Second, teachers will be able to use the average formula to more completely summarize data. In video 1, we got your spreadsheet set up so that we are ready to begin looking at the student achievement data. This one's going to help you use two main tools, filters and formulas, in order to more effectively summarize that data based on the categories that you're going to be using. So in order to do that, we're going to first take a look at the data. We're going to be using the same 3 example spreadsheets that we used in the last video. And then we're going to take a look at filters, how they're going to help us, and then secondly, how to use them. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at formulas. Once we've filtered out specific groups of students, how can formulas help us to summarize the data that we see for those students? So we're going to start with filters. And filters are a tool that we use in order to narrow down a large spreadsheet full of information to small specific groups of students. So let's go ahead and take a look at sample data A. This should look familiar from the last video. We have all the same information, and then at the end you'll notice we've added 2 columns here. We've added a column that adds the sex of each student as well as a column that adds the race of each student. And you'll see in a minute why we've done that. So what we're looking at here is a lot of information. So the first thing that we want to do is begin to narrow down that information. So we're looking at specifically the data that we want to eventually present. So I'm going to start over here on the left, and again I see the students' names, and this is going to be important, so I'm going to leave that there. The next part I see a bunch of rows with answer choices from the test that they took. So we see A, B, C, D. This we don't need for the student data that you're going to be summarizing. What we need is the overall percentage correct. So I can go ahead and hide these columns to make it a little bit easier to focus on just the data that we want to look at. You can also leave them unhidden, which is completely fine, so if you want to choose to skip this step, you may. In order to hide it, you would select the group of columns that you want to hide, and it automatically selected these for me. You're going to right-click, or on a Mac, you're going to hit Control-click, and you're just going to choose to hide the columns. And now it's simply taking that information out of the picture. I haven't deleted it, it's still in the spreadsheet, but now I'm simply looking at the percentage mastery of 5 objectives as well as their percent correct overall. And then the last 2 columns that I see are sex and race. So now what I want to begin to do is the 2 areas that I've chosen to summarize my data are sex and race. So I want to start breaking down these numbers into specifically male groups of students, female groups of students, and then groups of students based on race to see how my student mastery compares based off of those groups. So to help me narrow down this information, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use filters to help me do that. You want to add your filters on the row that contains your labels, okay? And that's usually going to be the first row in your spreadsheet. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that entire row. And this is the row that I'm going to be adding my filters on, okay? Once I've highlighted that, I'm going to go up to Data on the menu bar at the top. And once I click that, I see a filter option. When I select filter, I see I'm given a few more options. We're going to use auto filter. And what it does once you hit auto filter is it turns your filters on. We now see that each label has a little drop down menu next to it. This is our filter, and this is going to allow us to narrow down our spreadsheet by specific topics. So let's go ahead and start with sex for data sample A. I'm going to break down my data for this spreadsheet simply comparing male and female percent mastery. So I'm going to start and I'm going to select female. It's now filtered out and my spreadsheet is only showing the student mastery of my female students. The male students haven't been deleted, it's simply hiding them because I've selected female and I just want to look at my female students. So now we see here it shows all the percent mastery of our female students. Okay. I can unfilter it by clicking back on that menu and selecting Show All. That's the basics of filter. I'm going to go ahead and show you this again in the next 2 sample spreadsheets. And then we're going to come back to this one and we're going to use those filters and begin averaging out these numbers and figure out how we can begin to display the averages for male versus female students. Okay. And I'm going to save this because that'll keep the filters on for the next time I open it. And we're going to open up data B and we're looking at the corrected version. Remember where we swapped the students from the top to the left-hand side of the screen. The reason that we're doing this is because we want to filter by mastery like we did in the last one, and we want to be able to put the filters on this top row. Before we had students up there and we wouldn't be able to use the filters this way. That's why in the last video we transposed them and put the students in that first column, and we made sure that the objectives were in that first row. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my filters on, and again I'm going to want to look at class period, sex, and their average score. So I'm going to want my filters to show up right here. In the last one I highlighted the whole row. You don't always have to do that. If I just want filters on these 3 categories, then I'm going to go ahead and just turn my filters on there. And again, I select data, filter, auto filter, and we see that those drop-down menus appear for the 3 columns that I've highlighted. Okay. So for this one, we're actually going to look at class period, and we want to compare the student mastery scores of our first class period to our second class period, to our third class period, and to our fourth class period. So I'm going to click on the filter here, and we're going to want to start with class period 1. And again, it filters out any students who are in class period 2, 3, and 4, and now I'm looking at just the scores for class period 1. I can either click on this menu and then switch to class period 2, and it does the same thing with only students in class period 2. I can do the same thing for class period 3, as well as for class period 4. And again, when I want all the students to reappear, I'm going to click on that filter, and I'm going to select Show All. Okay. You can also choose using a filter to sort in ascending or descending order. When I do that, it's going to show all the students, but it's now rearranged them, no longer by name as it did originally, but now it's arranged them in class period order, in ascending order. So 1 is going to come first, then everyone in class period 2, class period 3, and class period 4. You can also choose to do it in the opposite direction by selecting descending. And now it's showing class period 4 first, class period 3, class period 2, and class period 1. Okay. And now in this case, we can also use the second filter we've created for sex. If you want to search for males versus females, I can select females. I can even then order them in ascending order. So I see females in class period 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I can use multiple ones. Okay. We're now going to go ahead and take a look at the last sample spreadsheet. And we're going to save the changes that we've made. And now we're going to go back to data C. Okay. And again, this should look familiar from video 1. We see we have the students' names listed over here on the left side. We have answers to all the questions here. And we then have the number correct as well as the total percent. And so again, I can choose to hide these columns here. I don't need these answers. However, if you look at this one, you do see that under each one it's shown for that objective, the mastery percentage there. So you might want to keep those columns for that reason. If you're just looking at total mastery for the data that you're presenting, then you can go ahead and hide these and make the spreadsheet a little bit easier to look at. And again, I'm going to right click or control click, click hide. And now when we scroll over here, we see the spreadsheet has been simplified. We see student names, their ID number, their class number, the number correct, and then the percentage. Then we see the 2 columns that we've added here at the end. And for this one, we're looking at class period and race. Okay, we've added these again so that we can filter our student achievement data by these specific categories that you've chosen to look at. Okay, and again, to add the filters, I'm going to select the 2 columns that I want to filter by. I'm going to select data, filter, auto filter, and there are drop-down menus. So again, if I want to view class 1, and then I could choose to view African American students in class 1, it appears we only have 1. Or if I want to look at African American in general, I can turn this filter off and say show all. However, I've left the race filter on, so now I'm looking at all my African American students regardless of class period. Okay, so you can choose to use one filter at a time. You can choose to be even more specific and use both at once. For starters, you definitely want to start with just one filter and look at the larger groups of data. But as you progress in what you're hoping to present, it might be helpful to have both of them. Okay, to turn that off, I'm going to say show all. And again, you can also sort in ascending order. It's now ordered by class period. If you're sorting race by ascending or descending, it's just going to do it in alphabetical order. It doesn't make as much of a difference as it does with something like class period, where you may want to observe what does your student achievement data look like from the beginning of the day through the end of the day. Do those time periods matter? Okay, so those are the basics of filters. I'm going to close this one out and I'm going to go ahead and save so that when we return, the filters are still on.